It is Mr. Rooks. I'm going to go over these Chapter 2 notes with you on types of data. First category we're going to look at is univariate data, basically just meaning we've got one variable here. In subsequent chapters, we'll look at having two variables, and that is going to be called bivariate data. I think we'll see actually a couple of examples of that within here. So, types of variables again: age, ethnicity, viscosity, genre. There are all sorts of variables out there that you can look at. The ways we measure people, the way we talk about people. We're pretty good about categorizing things. And when we do that, we measure people in terms of variables. So, first, we're going to look at quantitative variables. These are ones basically where you're going to know the answer to the question is going to be a number. And that number is actually going to be a quantity. So, we will ask, for example, what is somebody's temperature? And if their temperature, the answer to that is 92.4 degrees, then temperature we're treating as a quantitative variable. Quantitative variables, you can usually come up with the units that you're measuring in. For example, this is where it says heights would be measured in inches, weights in pounds, and densities in whatever densities are. So, we've got an interesting category here that's really not necessarily a variable. It's really just an identifier or a label. These things are like social security numbers, jersey numbers. Like if you're number 8 on the volleyball team, that doesn't measure anything about you. That doesn't mean you're the eighth best player on the team. It just means that, hey, number 8, that your coach early on is probably too lazy to learn your name. ID numbers are the same way. They're just random digits that are assigned to you in order to identify you. Categorical variables are ones in which counting up the number of items or people that belong to a group is how you will identify a categorical variable. You're looking for the counts of people in a particular section. Now, you might notice, like, hey, wait a second, height and height are both listed as quantitative and categorical variables. And that's correct because they can be both. For example, if we ask the question for each person in the class, what's your height? The answer to that would be a number, 72 inches, 55 inches, 61 inches, which is different than if I say, okay, what's your height? Raise your hand if you're short, raise your hand if you're average height, raise your hand if you're tall. In that case, we would count how many people fall into that particular category. So again, what you want to ask yourself is, would the answer to the question that you are asking in your survey or your experiment, would the answer to that be a number or a word? If the answer is a word, you're generally looking at categorical. If the answer is a number, you're looking at quantitative. So if I wanted to go to the grocery store and I'm looking at basically what cereal is being chosen, and I've got Lucky Charms and Fruit Loops and Snap, Crackle, and Pop. That is Rice Krispies. That's just their characters. Anyway, I've got 3 cereals, and we're basically just looking at what cereal the customers are buying. In that case, at each customer, you'd ask them a question. Hey, what cereal did you buy? And if they say Fruit Loops, the answer there is a word. All right, if I want to know different prices on things, then I might ask, well, how much did you spend on your Lucky Charms? And if they say $1.99, then the answer to that is a quantity. That means we're dealing with a quantitative variable. I know it seems easy, but there are times it can get a tad bit confusing. Remember this, if it makes sense for you to take an average of the numbers, then you're dealing with quantitative data. If it makes sense for you to change it into a percentage, that's the time when you should go with categorical. That is what it says right in here. All right, let's look at some examples here. So we're going to identify as quantitative or categorical, and then we're either going to use an average or a percentage to describe the results in context. Unfortunately, we are not going to be able to do as much writing, you may be happy about this, as we would normally like to in the online part of this class. It's going to have to be more multiple choice than I would ideally like, but that's the way it goes. So the thing about context is you always want to put things into its situation. You'll see lots of problems throughout the year where I'll be talking about the percentage of people that like pizza over hamburgers in Kansas. Well, at that point, you better know, you better say something about pizza, you better say something about hamburgers, and you better say something about Kansas, because that is the context. It's the situation that the problem involves. They're very tough on this on the AP grading in their rubric. They can knock you from an E, excellent, to just P, proficient, for a lack of context. So you must do this. So looking at this problem again, we have 50 freshmen, 50 sophomores, and they're asking, do you love horror more than comedy? So again, the answer is, what do you love best, horror or comedy? The answer is going to be a word. I like horror movies. We have 40 freshmen that answer yes. What would naturally be done with that 40 out of 50? Wouldn't make any sense to average those two numbers. You would take that 40 out of 50, make that into a fraction, and probably turn it into a percentage, and say 80% of the freshmen surveyed love horror movies, which is more than comedy, which is higher than 60% of sophomores that do. So again, I just changed both of these into percentages and then compared the two, making sure in context I mentioned freshmen, sophomores, and the two genres here. All right, example 2, we've got a random sample of tire pressures on 10 cars at Rydell High School, measured in the following units, which is PSI, pounds per square inch. The seniors have these measurements, the juniors have those measurements. Normally in class, this is about the time when I would ask, hey, does anybody know where the high school Rydell is in what movie? And there's generally somebody who does, because it's from the movie Grease, and at that point we'd usually go into some really fun, raucous, sort of impromptu performance of Summer 11 from Grease. It would look something like this. Summer loving had me a blast. Summer loving happened so fast. I met a girl crazy for me. Met a boy cute for me. Summer days drifted away to another summer night. Tell me more, tell me more. All right, so that would usually be going on. We'd, carry on. I'd do the wobbly knee thing like John Travolta does. It would be good fun, good times. But unfortunately, yeah, no, not so lucky. You just gotta listen to me go on about these notes here, and feel free to pause anytime. Go get yourself a soda or something, a snack, and come back and take a little mental break, and we'll just continue here. Next one is ID numbers. I said that before. That's just an identifier or a label. Here we've got some study times. Again, you got to ask yourself, what did you ask each person? You asked them, hey, how long do you study for? And they're like, ooh, I study for 3 hours. And this person, who probably does not have very good grades, they don't study at all. So you would average those numbers and say the average study time for these 7 students at LHS is 1.3857 hours. Random sample of 80 Kansans are asked, do you like classical music? Again, the answer is going to be yes or no. When it's a word answer, that tells you it's categorical. I find the percentage, 25 divided by 80, and that turns out to be 31.25% of the sample of Kansans likes classical music. This is what I mean by bivariate data. We've got 2 variables here divided into these categories of what age group they fall into, and asking them what do they like better, drama or action movies. In this case, both of them, what they have here is these are categorical variables, and what's inside is just a count of how many people who are in each of these categories fits with drama or action in each age group. The way you describe something like this is to talk about the distribution of it. So you can see I've just doubled these numbers. That actually means is that the breakdown for the favorite type of movie is actually the same between each age group. So you see, because each of those is just twice the amount. 7, I've got a researcher. I missed this from having you guys in class because normally I'd ask one of you to read this so I wouldn't have to do all the reading. It's a headache medicine for alleviating headaches. We've got 2 random samples divided into 2 groups. The treatment group that gets the real medicine, and you get your control group that gets a placebo, which is part of this class. It's a little sugar pill that makes you think that you're getting the real medicine. Reports 10 out of 25 feel better. So again, at its heart, you're asking each person a question. Do you feel better? And the answer to that question is yes or no. That makes it categorical. And there's my nice little sentence in context describing it. Example 8, same researcher again does the exact same experiment, but this time asks them to rate their pain on a scale of 1 to 10. So now when they ask, they say, what's your pain rating? And the rating is 7. 7 is not a count of anything. It's actually a number that they're using to quantify their pain. Therefore, it's a quantitative variable. Some tax scores here. This is where it gets pretty tricky because right here, sorry, this is not the tricky one. It's the next one. This one we have inside some results for tax scores. Male and female, passing and failing. What these would be are counts of each group, whether they passed or failed. And again, when you get down to it, for each one, each student, you would first ask, okay, are they a male or a female? Then you would categorize them. But you then ask the follow-up question, which is, what's their score? That you might think, ooh, that's quantitative, but no, you then assign it to a category. If they had a certain score, it's failing or passing, so ultimately this is categorical. Unlike the next example where we're looking at SAT scores, once again, you may ask the question, well, is the person male or female, categorizing them. Ask then, well, are they a junior or a senior? Fine. But we're not counting how many male juniors there are. We're then looking at that particular male junior student and asking, what was their score on the math section? When we take the answer to that, that was like, okay, this is a 420. Therefore, these must be average scores. Again, averages go with quantitative. Lastly, I don't know, it's kind of, I didn't have a very creative answer or question here, but we've got 25 teachers asking, do you want your kids to be rich, famous, or creative? 10 answer rich. Obviously, that is a word answer, which indicates that it's categorical, and the natural thing to do with that would be to take 10 out of 25, which is 40%. All right, that's the notes there. There is a homework assignment to practice on, so give that a shot and see how you can do with it. All right, talk to you again soon.